Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Let's continue with part 3 on topic 4. In this part, we'll look at nested if statement, which is having if statement within the if, and also multiple selections, which is having multiple if else within the if or within the else. What we have learned so far, we have looked at different types of control structures, operators that covered the equality and relational operators, logical operators, truth tables, and the precedence order of those operators. We have learned on how to write one-way selection, which is the use of if and the expression if-else, and the use of braces to contain block of statement. Let's remind ourselves what those are again before we go deeper into multiple selection, as it is important that we know how to use if and also if-else. Say that we have this question. Write a program that prompts the user to enter a number. Display the number if it is even. Using the if statement, we can have if number modulus 2 equal to 0. Here, whatever the user typed from the keyboard, if the remainder is 0, it is an even number. Say that the user enter 128. 128 modulus 2 gives us 0. So using the equality 0 equal to 0, give us the value true. Remember that the equality operator has two values, either true or false. If it is true, the statement within the if block will be executed, which in this code, it will display 128 is an even number. Also here, I used curly brackets even though we only have one statement. It is not needed, but it doesn't matter if I want to have it. Now, using the same question, say that we want to display number is an odd number if the user enters, for example, the value 3. In the if previously, if the user entered the value 3, it will not do anything. So over here, in the if expression, if the condition is false, it will execute the statement in the else block. If we run this code and enter 3, it will display 3 is an odd number. What if the user enters the value 0? Is it an odd or even number? If the user enters 0 in this program, it will display 0 is an even number. But we know that 0 is not an even number, and it is also not an odd number. A 0 is basically a 0. How can we include a statement that says if any number is 0, it should display 0. If it gives us the remainder of 0, it is an even number. Otherwise, it is an odd number. There are several ways to do this. One of it is by using multiple selection. In multiple selection, the syntax is similar to what we have seen previously, but we have if-else within the else. Here it shows that we have if expression 1, we would do statement 1. Else, we have if expression 2, statement 2. Else, statement 3. It can be as many if-else as we need it. When we have multiple selection, each of the else is associated with the most recent incomplete if. Also, instead of using multiple if-else, we can use multiple if statements. It may take longer to evaluate and it has to check each of the if-else. From the question earlier, we can modify our code to have multiple selection and include 0 to have its own if statement. We need to be careful of where we place it as it could give different result than expected. We need to think of the flow of the program. For example, do you want to check if the number entered is 0 first, or do you want to do the modulus and check the remainder first, then only check if the user entered the number 0? Let's look at this code here where we have if number equal to 0 as the first if statement. If the number entered is not 0, it goes to the else. Within the else, there is another if-else. In the second if statement, it checks if the user has a remainder of 0 or 1, where 0 means even and 1 means odd. If you have braces, be really careful as it needs to be in pair. otherwise you will have an error when compiling. For beginners, it might be a good idea to write a command as shown in this code here to know exactly which braces belongs to which if or else. Also, to make it easier to read through the code, use tabs or spaces to separate the outer if-else and the inner if-else. If you have more if-else, type it at each pair so that you know which if and which else belongs to which of it. This code over here is exactly the same as the previous one. You can choose not to have the braces as we only have one statement at each if and else. It makes your code seems shorter as it has less lines now. Both would give the same result. How else do you think we can modify our code to check if the number is 0? We can write our code like this where we have two expressions in the if. Here we use the AND operator. It checks if the number entered has the remainder of 0 and also if the number entered is not 0. If both of the expressions are true, it will execute number is an even number. Otherwise, it will go to the else part. Within the else, we have another if-else. It then checks the expression in the second if whether the number is equal to 0. If the condition is true, it will display number is a 0 number. Otherwise, it will go to the else and display number is an odd number. You can use different expressions to refer to the same thing. For example, we can use number modulus 2 equal to 1 instead of using number modulus 2 equal to 0. When we change it, we need to change the system.out.println as well, because this part it should display number is an odd number. We can also use number modulus 2 not equal to 0. That is the same as number modulus 2 equal to 1. Here is showing another example where you have a number entered by the user and it is being saved in the variable called a. Depending on the condition, it will execute the statement accordingly. As each if and else has two statements, it needs to have the braces, otherwise it will have a compilation error. In the first statement, the condition is a larger than or equal to 1. If that is false, it will go to the else. And within the else, we have another if with the condition a less than 0. If a is not less than 0, it will execute the statement within the last else block. If we run this code, it will ask the user to enter the number. If the user enters 15, it first checks, is 15 larger or equal to 1? The condition is true, so it will ignore the rest of the code and go straight to the statements within the if, which will display the number you enter is 15, you enter the positive number. Say that we run this code again. If the user enters minus 15, it checks the first expression in the if. Is minus 15 larger or equal to 1? The condition becomes false, so it skips the if statements and goes to the else. As there is an if within the else, it checks again. Is minus 15 less than 0? The condition is true, so it executes the statements within the second if and ignore the rest. It will display the number you enter is minus 15. You enter the negative number. What if the user enters 0? Similar steps as before, it checks the first if. 0 larger or equal to 1? That is false. It goes to the else part and checks the second if. Is 0 less than 0? That is also false. So it goes to the next else. And within the last else, it does not have an if. So it executes the statements straight away and display the number you enter is 0. You enter the 0 number. Let's look at this example. Say that the question is read a mark and determine the grade based on the grading scheme. So the complete code of this would require the user to enter a mark from the keyboard, and based on the entered value, it will display the grade for that mark. You might want to use multiple if-else in this type of question when you have ranges of numbers. Before writing the code, you might want to understand the flow first. Should you start off with the lowest score range and move upwards, or going from larger range and move downwards? Both works depending on how you write your code. In this code here, it starts from the top to bottom, so it first checks if the score entered is it larger than 90. If it is not larger than 90, it can be any number ranging from 0 to 89. So in the else, we can have another if that checks the range from 80 to 89. Because if it is 90, it will pass the first if and will never goes to the else. If a score is not within 80 to 90, it goes to the else and do another checking in the if for the range of 70 to 79. It keeps on going through else and if until score is larger or equal to 60, which is the range of 60 to 69. In the last else, do we need another if? We don't need the if because we don't care about the range anymore. In the last else, it basically is the default for any value that do not satisfy the conditions of the multiple if-else. How should we change our code if we want to check from F to A? In the previous code, we are checking from A to F. Let's look at this code. We start off with mark less than 60, then we write if mark less than 70, that is the range of 60 to 69. In the next else, and we have the if, we write the range of 70 to 79, and then 80 to 89, and in the last else, that is basically any number larger than 90. However, this code and the previous one have a logical error. What happens if the mark entered is 500? It will display that the grade is A. If we enter minus 100, it will display the grade is F. So, what can we do with it? We can add another expression to limit the maximum and minimum values using the AND operator, but it needs to be done at each if expressions. See here that at the last if, we don't have an else. We can have multiple selection and ends with if. It does not matter because we only care about the values from 0 to 100. If we run this code and enter mark as 500, it checks the first if. 500 less than 60 is false, and mark larger than 0 is true, so false and true becomes false. It goes to the else and checks the condition in the if. 500 less than 70 is false, mark larger than 0 is true, so false and true becomes false. It checks the other if-else and none of it will match. What do you think will happen if we only have the expression mark larger than 0 in the first if? Say that the user enters minus 100. It checks the first if. Minus 100 is less than 60, that is true. Mark larger than 0 is false, so true and false become false. It will go to the else statements. Within the else, we have another if. It checks minus 100 less than 70. That is true, so it will display grade as D for the mark of minus 100. This shows that we need to be careful on how we write the code when it comes to having ranges, as we might get an unexpected result. When we have multiple selections, we can use the last else to deal with other unexpected values. For example, maybe displaying a message that says invalid score. This is more useful than nothing is being displayed on the screen when the user enters unexpected value. Instead of using multiple if-else, we can rewrite the code to only use if statements. This will also give a similar result. I said similar but not exactly the same. Can you tell me why these two are not exactly the same? In the if-else code, we can enter 500 and it will give us grade A. If we enter minus 100, it will give us F. In the multiple if statements, we fix the range. For example, in the first line we have if Mark is larger than or equal to 90 and Mark less than or equal to 100. So that means the range of grade A is between 90 and 100. What if in the if statements we don't have the AND operator? For example, we write if Mark larger than or equal to 90, grade is A. Do you think that it will work similar to if else? If we enter Mark is 90, what do you think the output will be? Is it grade A? It will display F. Why do you think that happened? Remember that in if else, it only has two options, whether to execute the statement in if or the statement in else. When we have several if statements, it will check all of those sequentially, meaning that in the order that we wrote our code. So when we enter Mark is 90, it checks the first if Mark is larger or equal to 90, which is true. So grade is A. Then it goes to the next if. Is 90 larger or equal to 80? That is true. So now it changed the grade from A to B. It then checks the next if. 90 is it larger or equal to 70? Yes. So grade is now changed to C. It keeps on going until the last one. Is 90 larger or equal to 0? Yes. So 90 has the grade of F. This is a logical error. Let's change the if-else code to ensure that the range is between 0 to 100. We can add the first line in if-else where we can have if Mark is less than or equal to 100 and Mark is larger than or equal to 0. This line of code ensures that the grade is given only if the mark is between 0 and 100. If that is true, it will then check whether it's A, B, C, D, or F. Let's check our understanding about multiple selections. Say that we have these two sets of multiple selections, A and B. Are they different? In A, else is aligned with the first if. In B, else is aligned with the second if or the inner if. Which if does the else belongs to? It is important to realize that the indentation alone is not sufficient to determine the nesting of if statements. The compiler will always match the else with the nearest if, meaning that the else belongs to the second if. Both A and B, if we use braces, is represented as shown in the code on the right side. We can see much clearer that the else belongs to the inner or the second if when we use the braces. If you want the else to match with your first if, then you have to write braces for your first if and it should contain the second if within it. You don't exactly need to put all braces. You can do as in A, where the braces is only to have the second if within the first if, so that the else is paired with the first if, not the latest if. In B, we can see that we have braces at each if and else. It can look a bit confusing. You can always write comments as what you can see here, just to label the braces belongs to which if and else. Let's look at another one here. Are A and B different? Yes, they are. In A, else is paired with the first if because of the braces. In B, else belongs to the second if because the compiler will always match the else with the nearest or latest if. So, be careful when you write your code and be specific when you have multiple selections, whether you want to pair the if and else statements with the latest one or with the first one. To summarize, we have looked at examples of using multiple selections, such as if-else within else and also if-else within if. We also looked at how we can use logical operators for if conditions and the importance of braces. Without braces, when we have multiple selections, the else statement will always belong to the latest or the last if statement.